much, Rachel. I'm actually going to pass it to Leanne, who's going to start us off here. And we have one more poll question. We're just going to go through to get some information about all of you while we go through some of this information. So Leanne, I'll pass it off to you.
Awesome. All right. Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. My name is Leanne Curley, and I'm a recruiter with Buildium, as is Morgan, and you'll hear more from Morgan later. As she mentioned, we have some polls happening that we would love for your contribution to. So know that those are up and ready to go. Feel free to put in your responses. And then other than that, we'll get started. So can everyone hear me okay? Morgan, maybe if you want to confirm that you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. Perfect. Thanks. All right. Well, as I said, my name is Leanne. Really excited to be talking with you today. I know that this is certainly an unprecedented time, and we really appreciate you taking time out of your afternoon, needed to remind myself what time it was, to be here with us. We chose a topic that we're hoping is relevant, especially given the times that we're living in now. So today we'll be talking about how you differentiate yourself in a saturated job market. In terms of what you can expect from our agenda today, I'll talk to you a little bit about what we do at Buildium. We'll talk about starting your search process. Once you make it to the interview, how you can ensure interview success. Then more specifically, interviewing in a remote world. And then we're going to open it up to Q&A. And something to know, though our Q&A is reserved until the end, if you have questions throughout the webinar, feel free to use the chat function. One of my colleagues, Christina, will be monitoring that chat function so that later during Q&A, we can make sure we're getting to a number of the questions that you post throughout the session. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about who we are at Buildium. So I know that some of you may have learned a little bit about us if you were at the fair from noon to 1 p.m. But what is it that our company does? So we're a simple and affordable cloud-based software for landlords, professional property management companies, and self-managed condos and homeowner associations. So you can kind of think of us as a one-stop shop for property owners and managers to be able to do all the things they need for their business to run successfully. In terms of size, Buildium is a RealPage company, which means we're part of a larger organization called RealPage. Buildium within RealPage has about 260 employees with locations mainly in Boston, which is where we're headquartered, and also India and Portugal. But when you consider us within the larger RealPage organization, there are 7,000 employees and many more additional locations across the world. So a little bit more about what we do. We enable managers of small to medium-sized residential, commercial, and association properties to take control of really every aspect of their business. So things like rent, vacancy, maintenance cycles. We have a pretty large share of the market with 18,000 customers, and we have over 2 million units under management. So perhaps some of you who are logging in today might think to yourself that you actually might use Buildium to pay your own rent. And with that being said, over 2 million units under Buildium is a pretty large number. Now this again is like the 30-second elevator pitch of who Buildium is. We'd love to talk to you more at our booth about who we are. And additionally, we're having another event with Geeks out on April 28th next week. So you can learn a little bit more about us there as well. Last slide before I turn it over to Morgan. Just want to introduce you to the team. So as you can see here, this is a good portion of our people operations team at Buildium. Many of us have a large hand in the recruiting process, including myself and Morgan, who you'll hear more from in just a moment. We also have Jeff Belanger, who's our VP of People Operations, Wanda Hayden-Bolton, who's currently at our table, and Christina, who, as we go through this, is helping with Q&A, and you'll probably hear a little bit from her later. But with that being said, would love to turn it over to Morgan to talk to you a little bit about getting started.
Well, hi, everyone. Like Leanne said, thank you so much for joining us today. I know there's A lot of exciting stuff at the fair, so we're excited to have you join for our webinar. We wanted to start this topic of really differentiating yourself in a saturated job market with just how you do that. So simply in a time where companies are getting a number of candidates, we really wanted to talk to you guys about how to differentiate yourself from the competition. That really starts with your strengths. So how do you identify your strengths that make you a stronger candidate than someone else who's going for the same role? That may not be the easiest thing for everyone. So some things that we recommend doing are think of wins that you've celebrated in past jobs, things that you were recognized for or personally proud of. What were those attributes that were being celebrated? And then ask yourself, or if you're still in contact with them, ask them, but think about if your current and past managers were in a room together, what would they say your strengths are, and go from there. Another thing to do is really identify your interests and passions and then see how you can relate those to whether it's a company's industry or mission or their general culture, doing some research about companies after you really identify what's important to you. For me personally, an appreciation and commitment to philanthropy was always really important in the next company I joined, and I was very excited to find that at Buildium, and that was something that I was asking about in my interview and finding out about throughout the whole process. Also, I'm going to talk about it a lot more in the next slide, but utilizing your connections. It can be a major differentiator to just be a referral. It puts you at the top of the stack where a current employee is saying, hey, I vouch for this person. I think they're going to be great for our company and what we're doing here. You should really talk to them. So if you can be someone's referral and reach out to them, I definitely would. But here, let me tell you a little bit more about that now. So the easiest place to start when you find yourself in a job search is to really think about who do you know and how can they help you. Utilize those connections. In a time like this, people are looking for any opportunity to help people out there because they know people are in difficult situations. So reach out to your friends and your family, old colleagues you stay in contact with, and see how they can help you. Whether it's referring you to a position at their current company, introducing you to someone who can refer you at another. That's just a great way to get your foot in the door at a company, to be someone's referral. And then if you're able, I know a lot of you are in different situations, but if you're able to post on LinkedIn or another social media platform about your current situation, what you're looking to do next, what sort of opportunities you'd be interested in, and really let the internet kind of take hold of that and introduce you to people in a virtual way, is a great way to build those connections. You can also, some of you may know about this already, some may not, but there's a feature on LinkedIn that you change to say you're open to new opportunities. And it really just flags you for recruiters or hiring managers that you're actively looking for a new opportunity and you're open to talking to them. Those are typically the people that recruiters will start with first, just because they know they're on an open job search. One little caveat, just from a recruiter's perspective, is if you are still employed and you don't necessarily want your current employer to know you're looking, be mindful that there are potential ways they could get around and see that you have this feature enabled. So just be mindful of that if you are still employed. And then always follow companies you're interested in, whether it's on LinkedIn or other social media. You can stay engaged with what they're doing. If you do end up interviewing with them, you're going to have great content to talk about. And that's really going to kind of set you apart from the pack of someone who's really engaged in the company and really passionate about what they're doing. And then, similar to this event, find your community. Join meetup or Facebook groups, attend virtual events like this one, or the one Leanne mentioned that we're hosting, I believe it's next Tuesday, the 28th, where you can get to know people who are in either similar positions to you or similar industries. And then keep up to date on those kind of blogger news articles about what's going on in your industry, or new processes people are using or new technologies people are using to really keep you up to date throughout your job search. It's also going to give you some great information you can talk to potential hiring managers about. So before we jump into the actual interview process and ways to set yourself up for success in that, we really wanted to talk about preparation, because it's something that could easily be overlooked but has a lot of important factors in it. So when you're preparing to get back on the job market, first, obviously, you want to update your resume. But with that, you don't just want to put kind of a blob of what you were doing. You really want to highlight the experience that relates to the job you're applying for. So some of you may be applying for multiple different types of jobs, and that's wonderful. You just want to switch your resume a little bit to really pick and choose the experience from past roles that really highlight that position and why you'd be a good fit. Typos. This is something that may seem very small and silly to think about, but I promise you it's something very important. So proofread your resume, have a friend or mentor proofread, just get another set of eyes on it. But although they may seem small, it can really be a main kind of trigger to recruiters or hiring managers that you're lacking attention to detail if there's silly things like typos in your resume. So just an easy thing to avoid and make sure you're not falling into that category. Now, cover letters. This is something we get a lot of questions about, and it definitely depends on your industry. So if it's standard in your industry to do cover letters, by all means, keep doing that. But I know at least in tech and a lot of other industries, cover letters are sort of becoming a thing of the past. And especially in such a saturated job market, you want to find a way to be as clear and concise as possible. So whether it's a small executive summary at the top of your resume, I know myself personally, when I updated my resume, I just put 2 sentences at the top of kind of who I was and why I was interested in this position. So I highly recommend doing that. Now, when we get to where are you applying? I think in a time like this, where unfortunately a lot of people did not choose to be on a job market, it's easy to think the best kind of step forward is to cast as wide of a net as possible and see what comes back. But there are some risk factors with that we just wanted to warn you of. Specifically, when you are applying to jobs at a specific company, you want to be careful not to apply to too many positions at that company. Although you may be open to a lot of things, it gives the impression that you don't really know what you want to do. And although that may be true sometimes, we want to kind of work through that with you. Just applying to mass jobs at the same company is not necessarily the best way forward. What I would recommend instead is applying to the one you're most interested in. If you do get an interview, you can absolutely talk to the recruiter about those other positions and see if they'd be in line with what you're looking for and go down that path. But it's really best to zero in on one position at one company. And a good recruiter will also kind of bridge that gap and tell you if they think you'd be a better fit for another position. Applying to a lot of jobs in general, just a quick warning to always keep track of that information. I think as recruiters, we talk to a lot of people who are clearly applying to a lot of jobs, and as that's okay to do, it's just clear they've kind of lost track about why they were interested in this position, what we do, and you always want to be putting your best foot forward in those conversations. So even just an Excel spreadsheet to track what job you're applying for, what the company does, why you were interested in that position, and why you think you'd be a good fit. You may think you'll remember it when you first see the job, but things move quickly in job searches and a lot of information is being traded back and forth, that it's just a good reference point to go back to before actually setting up the interview. And then before you actually get on the phone with someone, you want to make sure that you're comfortable talking about yourself. I know this doesn't come easy to everyone. It may come easier to others. So there's kind of a middle ground of finding a very clear and concise way to explain your career progression, decisions you've made, if you've shifted in industry or role, kind of what caused that decision. But we highly recommend practicing going through this and putting together almost an elevator pitch, about a 30 to 60 second rundown of your career and how you got to where you are. And always be ready to discuss those transitions in your career that are from job to job or whatever it may be, just because those are common things people will be interested in. So that's the preparation side of it. I'm going to pass it back to Leanne to go into a little bit more about the actual interview process.
Awesome. So before I even talk about steps to interview success, Morgan, something I realized I said I was going to do is tell you all why Morgan and I have these backgrounds. So I wanted to make sure I mention it. So this isn't, I know it looks like a great it's so natural for me to just look like I'm in this place right now. But if you can believe it, Morgan and I both have our photo background as the Buildium office. So different parts of the office. Just wanted to make sure I got that across so that you all didn't think we just picked some rando backgrounds for today's webinar. But Morgan and I are both in the Buildium kitchen is how we're trying to portray that. So hopefully that helps you. But anyways, more importantly, steps to interview success. So Morgan's helped you prepare to think about the resume and all of those good things, but now let's say you've made it to the point of the interview. So how can you best set yourself up for success? Getting ready. First, do your research and be selective. So what that means is you want to make sure you're going into the interview with a good sense of what that company does and what position it is that you've applied for and are interviewing for. I know Morgan talked a little bit about this, during the previous slides, but it can be difficult, especially if you're applying to a number of jobs, to keep these things just all up here in memory. So make sure you're reviewing and preparing for that interview. So you don't have to be an expert in the company by any means, but certainly have a good idea of what's done there and how your role kind of fits into that. And then think, why do you want to work there, right? Hopefully there's a better reason than, you just found us on Indeed. Going steps beyond that about why you think you would be excited to work at said company. And do some research. Maybe you'll learn that the company was recently acquired or recently received a large amount of funding. These are all things that you can then bring up during the interview if relevant, and the recruiter will know you did some background research. And then another thing to research, you can research the interviewer. Of course, the interview will probably first start with like a recruiter phone screen or something. I can promise you recruiters live on LinkedIn, so you should be able to find us, maybe see a little bit about their background, find some commonalities, and do that at any point in the interview process. You should probably have a heads up as to who you're interviewing with, so feel free to just do a little LinkedIn background search before you get on the phone with them or get on your virtual interview. Now, rehearse. That word can sound a little bit like, we don't want you to rehearse lines like you would for a play and be robotic, but at the same time, you don't want to just kind of jump into your interview without having given it any thought to start. So I would suggest researching common interview questions and having some bullet points prepared for how you want to cover those common interview questions and frame your responses. So I think a good rule of thumb is to make sure you're preparing some like 1 to 2 responses around how you would answer questions about the specific role you're applying for, but then also have a couple responses prepared for the company specifically and how you would respond to questions about that. It'll be better for you and you'll go into the interview less anxious knowing that you've prepared ahead of time. And then almost just as important as your responses are the questions that you ask. And during the interview, this isn't really the time to ask questions where you could easily find your answers online, right? So maybe you're not asking things like, when was the company founded, or things that are a bit more black and white. This is a good time for you to ask questions that really matter to you and how the role fits into the overall company. Next, how to be yourself on a phone or video interview. Now, Morgan will talk a little bit later about virtual interviewing, but no matter what, even pre-pandemic, a lot of times the first part of the interview is maybe having a recruiter phone screen. I know Morgan and I can both tell you, you can hear if a candidate is interested and enthused on the phone call. I know it might sound silly, but just try and picture us sitting right next to you, right? So hopefully, we hope you'd be smiling and excited and enthused. So keep that in mind when you are on the phone, and kind of think about, smiling through the phone call as you normally would. And then avoid distractions around you. Again, it'll make you less anxious. You won't have to worry about noises going off in the background, partners, family members, making their way through your phone call or video. But again, we'll touch a little bit more on that later. Next, other considerations. The recruiter is your resource. So you can ask them, simple logistical questions like, what's the correct interview hire for this? Things to prepare ahead of time, interview schedule. These logistics, a recruiter will most certainly have the answers to, but you also shouldn't be afraid to ask some more guided questions surrounding maybe what the hiring manager is looking for. What type of questions can they expect during the later rounds of the interview process? We're happy to be that resource for you, because a recruiter will typically know what's happening the next steps in the process, or at least we hope so. So we would love to be able to share that info with you if you choose to ask. Next, thank you email. So in most cases, I can assure you that interviewers are not expecting a thank you email or a thank you card, though I have actually received thank you cards, if you can believe it. Some people still write those out. I would say they're not expected. I mean, when in doubt, no one's going to be upset to receive a well-written thank you email, but just know that. And then the last thing I want to cover here, considering an offer. So you should never be surprised at the offer you receive. So what do I mean by that? Of course, not everyone who interviews for a role is going to get an offer, but if you do receive one, try and have done some steps before that so that the offer isn't a surprise in terms of salary and package. So I believe I may have seen some chats pop up about salary and things. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and we can go more in depth during Q&A if there are more questions. But first, goals. So does this position correspond to your short and long-term career goals? So if it does, then you kind of already have an idea that if you're receiving the offer, it's in good alignment with that. As you can see here, think of each opportunity more as a stepping stone to where you want to go. And then another thing that shouldn't really be a surprise is the salary piece. So for example, at Buildium, when you have the first part of the interview, that would be a recruiter phone call. We talk about salary right in the first call, and you're going to see that a number of recruiters will do that. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that we're making the best use of your time, that the salary you're expecting is in alignment with what we are planning to be paying for this position. So one, the recruiter might bring it up. And a good rule of thumb is to have a salary range going into this interview process. Now you may be asking, how do I figure out what the salary range is? I'm sure we are all familiar with websites where you can try and get a range, but know that that data can be skewed and is completely user generated. So that might not be the best way to figure out the range. What I would suggest is Morgan touched upon utilizing your network. This is a great opportunity to connect with professionals who are in a role for, similar to the one you're interviewing for, and talk to them about what a realistic salary range is for the position you're interviewing for. And if the recruiter doesn't proactively ask you about salary, you should feel okay asking about it yourself. Maybe it's not the first thing out of the gate as soon as you get on the call, but of course, when questions are opened up, feel comfortable saying things that, in regards to this position, I'd love to ask what you're all targeting as a salary range, and be prepared to give your general range. The recruiter will appreciate it, and you will too, because you'll be able to move ahead knowing if this position is in alignment with what you want. And then last but not least, accept rejection gracefully. So what do we mean by this? You might not receive an offer, despite the fact that you've gone all the way through the interview process. I can say, and I know Morgan can say it too, we do not like calling you to tell you you have not received the offer. I promise you that is not what we look forward to in this role. And we're sure that if you were excited about the role, that's not the call that you're hoping to receive. But that being said, please do not burn bridges in this process. I know you might be saying to yourself, well, of course, Leanne, I'm going to be nice no matter what the news is. And if that's your response, great. And I say that because you never know when you might run into that recruiter again. Or for example, the number of times I've talked with candidates who may not be a fit for that role, or we might not have an offer for them at that time. A lot of times we might go back to past candidates who had strong interview and again accepted rejection gracefully and think about them for another position. So please, please keep that in mind. I was actually talking to Christina, our head of talent acquisition, just a couple of days ago, about how one time in a recruiter role that she had, she let the individual know she wasn't extending the offer. And he actually followed up with the CEO of the company to say how upset he was because our recruiter treated him so well throughout the process. He was under the impression he was getting the job. So I would probably advise against doing something like that. Leave it on a nice note, and who knows, we may be coming back to you for another position. But I know I talked about how we're going to talk more about interviewing in a remote world, so I'll turn it over to Morgan to talk about that.
Awesome. So I'm sure some of you have already gone through the interview process now in our new remote world. We were preparing for it before we actually went fully remote and came up with some tips for the candidates that we're working with to make sure that they're prepared as well as our hiring managers are prepared. These are just some general tips. They may seem like common sense, but they're just great reminders for when you are doing a video interview or whatever it may be remotely. So like Leanne mentioned, find a quiet, private, well-lit place where you won't be interrupted by other people, pets, or noises. I know I've decided to quarantine in a place that has a few other people working from home, and we are all trying to keep our Zoom voices a little lower when we have different calls. So just make sure if you do have an interview, you're finding a quiet and private place. Position your webcam so that you have a neutral background or use a fun background like we're using here. I do recommend keeping it relatively tame, but make sure that your background is free from distractions. No one's really going to coffee shops these days, but just make sure that you're avoiding any communal spaces that you may be in. This may feel a little awkward, but you would probably be doing it more naturally if you were in person. When listening, really try and nod and smile to show you're engaged. I think it's easy to feel like you're in front of a computer screen, but try and pretend you're in front of a real person because they can see you. So go out of your way to nod and smile and engage with them. Check that you have reliable Wi-Fi connection, that your microphone, speakers, and camera are working prior to the interview. There's definitely been some cases with us so far that technical glitches come up. It does typically have to shorten the interview, and you want to make sure that you're getting the maximum amount of time to speak with the hiring manager or whoever it may be. So just make sure all of your technology is in tip-top shape before you start. And then when taking notes, we highly recommend just using a notepad and pen off to the side so it's clear that you're taking notes and it doesn't seem like you're clicking around or have to leave the interview screen or lose kind of that face-to-face contact with the hiring manager. And then lastly, dress as you would for an in-person interview. I know we're all likely doing that just from the waist up these days, but at least what they can see, make sure that's what you would typically wear. Again, use your recruiter for resources on what you should be wearing. Is it a type of office that you should be in a more business professional attire, or are they a casual environment? So those are some of our last tips of advice. Thank you guys all again for joining us. We're going to open it up to some Q&A. So hopefully Christina and Jeff, if he's popped on, we can go through some of those questions. But I am going to flip it over to that.
Hello. So we did get a number of questions. We can start. So salary came up quite a bit, and everyone feel free to keep adding questions in as we go along. But I would say salary is one that has come up in a few different ways. So how do you address the compensation question in a screening call? It's hard to find out what the market is at, even with Glassdoor or Payscale, and where an employer stands. So I think, Leanne, you covered this pretty well in your part about salary negotiation. So I think we can spend a little bit more time there and just go over it for some folks who may have just joined. Any advice that you would give for somebody who is trying to find out what they're worth in the market? And I know there was one concern from someone on here saying that they don't necessarily feel comfortable asking other people in their field what they should be looking for because they might take that as asking them what they're making currently. So any ideas on who you could potentially ask in your network as well?
Yeah, I think that, and Christina, I'll let you jump in afterwards if you have any insight as well, but I would say we understand. I think that in some aspects, people may think of salary as like a taboo talking point. If you're not feeling comfortable reaching out to people in your network to ask, I do think that sometimes you'll find these types of resources also in certain groups or something that you may join. So I know that Morgan had talked a little bit about like finding your community. And I know that you might be able to join different groups that are industry specific or role specific. And that might be a good group way to kind of assess what the ranges are for certain positions rather than asking one person in particular if you think it's an invasive question to ask what they're making right now. And those groups might have more of an idea of giving you a range because there's a number of people who are in them who can share their thoughts. But that would kind of be my take. If Christina, Morgan, you have anything else?
Yeah, I would just say that, so all of those resources that Leanne mentioned, Glassdoor, PayScale, salary.com, take them with a grain of salt. I think one thing that people don't often think about is if I were to be looking for a new job, I'll reach out to my mentor who was a leader in talent acquisition at a previous company that I've stayed in touch with. So she can give me a good sense of what people on her team have roughly been making. So she doesn't feel like she's sharing her salary with me, but she just knows of the people she's hired in the past, roughly where have they fallen in a similar job. And then beyond that, if somebody were to move on from Buildium and then reach back out to me about an offer they were considering, I would certainly be happy to chat with them about that. So remember, be nice to the recruiters in your organizations or to recruiters maybe that you've worked with because they're doing this every day. So if you build a relationship with someone and you want to reach back out and say, hey, you know, I'm considering a new role, do you have an idea of roughly what the salary should be for a position like this? I know I'd be happy to help anyone in my network that was going through that. So I would say really rely on your connections and some of those external resources as well. And some professional organizations will release salary reports too. So if you subscribe to their newsletters, they'll probably send you an email notifying you of when their annual salary report comes out. I hope that helps. Let's see if we can go to the next one. Sorry, a bunch have come in, so I'm looking through. Yeah. One person left a comment. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I saw one salary comment come through too about laws in Massachusetts and how like you handle salary conversations, which I think is important. So we, and again, Morgan, Christina, jump in if you'd like, but in Massachusetts, you are not allowed to ask a candidate what they are making or were making at their job. That cannot be a question. So it still might, you know, someone mentioned like salary ranges on an application. That question can still be asked, but you cannot be asked to provide the salary that you are making now or were most recently making in your last position.
Correct. You're only asked, at least in Massachusetts, I'm not sure about other states right now, but for example, on Buildium's online application, it says, what is your required salary? So not what was your most recent salary, but rather what would you like to make moving forward? And that's in the spirit of gender equality and equity in that space, because we want to make sure that even if two people were making different amounts at a previous company for the same job, we can now try to help level the playing field a bit more. So when speaking with a recruiter, the question should always be, again, Massachusetts, what are you looking for, or what would it take in terms of salary to get you to be excited about a role with us? So that's an important one. Someone else mentioned some companies give you feedback if it wasn't a match, and that's helpful. But again, I think we just have to remember that some companies will, and I've also heard from candidates that companies say it's against their quote unquote policy. At Buildium, we do give feedback whenever possible because we want to help you in your job search. But what I would say is accept that feedback gracefully, because when you shoot down a recruiter or argue with them about the feedback that they're giving, it makes them more difficult. It makes it more difficult for them to give that feedback the next time, just because everyone reacts differently to feedback. So let's see. So to stick, I guess, with the salary theme, if we're thinking about being more flexible with our salary range, given how competitive the job market is now, I feel like I'm not really in a position to proactively offer my standard range. So Leanne and Morgan, you can start and I'll jump in.
Yeah, Morgan, did you want to take that?
Sure. Well, I think this is a time when you can have a very honest conversation with your recruiter from that beginning conversation, where you can say, in general, I would be targeting X amount. My circumstances based on our current world situation have changed. So if that's not the range that you guys are looking for, I'm open to a conversation. But I think it's okay to say where your expectations would typically be, and then also explain that you're open to a conversation. And that may even be in a more normal circumstance that you were targeting one number, but after hearing about what the company's doing and how exciting of a role it is and the career progression that you may get from that, you may be open to conversation about a lower number no matter what. So I think it's just important to make it clear if this is a hard number that is really your bottom line, or if you're open to a conversation, because it's just good. Recruiters can't really assume that. If you say this is my number, we would never want to assume that you are really open to more. So just explaining that and keeping that open line of communication.
Agreed. And I think something else to keep in mind is that we are asking for a range. So it doesn't have to be, 50 to 55. It could be 50 to 60 or 50 to 70, like whatever number it is that you feel comfortable offering up. Again, this is just an initial, for the recruiter phone screen, an initial conversation to make sure we're on the same page. And I think it's important that you are upfront with yourself, of course, more than anything about, okay, X is what I need, and know that going in, because that will make your negotiations down the road that much easier. So just make sure you know what you need and what your worth is going in, and that should hopefully help that conversation a little bit more. And again, don't be afraid to give a range. Let's see. So again, sticking with the salary topic, if you're applying to a job online and need to give a salary range and are then contacted to interview and salary is not discussed, can it be assumed that the range given on the application is within the range for the role? I mean, I can just answer that one. So typically, yes. If I call someone and I saw what they put in the application and we don't mention it, I'll usually confirm it, like, this is what you put in our application. Can I still assume that that's correct? I will typically do that, but if a recruiter doesn't mention it, you can typically assume that it's within the range. I will call people who are outside of our range, but again, we'll say, hey, you asked for X, we're offering Y. Is that something that would be doable for you? Of course, it can't hurt to confirm. So at the end of the call, you can say, throughout my search, I've been targeting a salary range of this to this. Is that within the range for this position? Don't be shy about that. I think a lot of companies are talking about salary up front, so you should feel comfortable to engage in that as well. Anything I missed?
Just to add in, I think it's very common to feel like this is an uncomfortable conversation, because as a candidate, you may not be having it every day, but keep in mind the recruiter is, and multiple times a day, and it's not strange for them to talk about. They want to be talking about it and making sure that everyone's comfortable with the position that they're in. So try to keep that in mind, that the people you're bringing it up to want to talk about it. You're not going out on a limb and bringing up something awkward.
That's
agreed.
Yeah.
And there was some concern too that if you put in a range and you fall above the range of what the job is offering, that you'll miss out on a great opportunity. So again, I would say you can put in a range, make sure that's your drop dead range, so that if they don't get back to you, well, it wouldn't have worked out for me anyway because it wasn't within what I needed. I mean, there are also ways around it too, right? Recruiters aren't going to be happy about it, but I'm not going to ignore a resume just because the person said their required salary was $0. right? If I like the resume, I'm still going to reach out. So if you personally feel comfortable or don't have a number or a range that you really need to stick within, and you're flexible, you can type in 0. And if your resume is a fit, I mean, at least for me and Leanne and Morgan, you can say for yourselves, when you review resumes, I would still call that person if I think the resume is a match.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Just a way to game the applicant tracking systems.
I think I saw one question about if you are a soon-to-be college graduate and just entering the job market. So at Buildium, as recruiters, we kind of recruit across the board, but also have certain areas of the company we recruit for most specifically. And I work with a lot of our entry-level sales positions. So a lot of times I am speaking with maybe college seniors about some of our opening positions. And what I would say, and I'd love to also hear Morgan and Christina if they have additional advice, but the question was, how do you stand out as a soon-to-be graduate in a market where there are less jobs and more people looking? I really think that the best way to kind of use the time going forward is to network. I don't want to speak for everyone, but I know it took me a bit in my career to get to a point where I started talking to professionals who were in roles that I was interested in, reaching out to them. And I wish I had done that sooner. So I think that as a soon-to-be graduate, if you are finding yourself with some time that you are unemployed, I think it's a really great time to just get in there and start doing that virtual networking. Because doing so will be helpful, one, because you may become a referral at a company that Morgan mentioned, because you've connected with someone and they had a great conversation with you, and therefore they're looking forward to referring you to their company, and that might not come about unless you choose to network. And then also, when you do get an interview, you can rely on that networking, bring it up in your interview that you have been speaking with professionals in that role already, and that's why you feel like it could be a great fit. And that can certainly be impressive. So I would try and say, use this free time that you maybe wish was spent more going right into a full-time role to network to get you to that full-time role, would be my suggestion.
Agreed. And that's actually how I got my first full-time role when I graduated. I took Morgan's advice. I posted on LinkedIn and in a few groups that focused on HR. Somebody looked at my profile, saw the college I went to, and reached out and said, "Oh, my wife went to the same school. I work in that industry. I'd be happy to talk to you." They connected me to an agency, a temp agency, where they had a friend who worked there, and that agency placed me in a contract position, which ultimately went into a perm role. So I would say, even a few people asked about remote work as well, and how do you find those? There are certain sites dedicated to remote work, but I also think working through a third party to find a role is extremely valuable at the same time, and helped to land me in a new field and as a new grad with no experience.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll keep going then. How can you adapt your resume to increase the chances of making it past the resume screen to make sure a person actually views it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, take it, Morgan.
Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like I've been talking a little bit, so I'm going to hand it to you, and I'll jump in if I need.
Well, I'm sure we'll all have opinions here. I know for me specifically, I read every resume that's submitted to us, so it's not necessarily about how do you make your resume read, and maybe some companies it is actually, but for me, it's really, can this person put together clear and concise information about why they think they'd be a good fit for this role? And so, similar to one of our earlier slides about really editing your resume to make sure that it's including things that are needed for that position. So look at the job descriptions that you're applying to. What sort of skills are they looking for? What would they be talking about you doing? Have you done those things before? Because if you have, then you can put bullet points in your resume that are very specific to that same duty. I think that's a very easy way for people to kind of see the kind of bridge the gap there. Obviously you don't want to just be repeating the job description on your resume. I don't recommend that, but just finding kind of the things in the job description that you know you'd be really good at, and how can you include those in clear bullet points on your resume. We can elaborate on that further, but do you guys have anything else you wanted to add?
I was just going to say, so yes, definitely that, because I'm sure you've all heard recruiters get a lot of resumes. They spend just a couple of minutes, maybe a minute. I forget what the stat is on each resume in general. And I know you all spend a lot of time on those, so that can be difficult to swallow, but it is true. So you want to make sure that it's digestible and the most relevant information is going to stick out to them right away. I would say if you, and then again, everyone talks about the applicant tracking system black hole, which does exist when you get hundreds and hundreds of applications. It is really difficult to get through all of them, though we do our best to do that. I would say another great way to have your resume reviewed is to reach out to a recruiter on LinkedIn. Now, I would say just reach out to one person at the company. So if you can figure out who you think the hiring manager is, or if you can identify someone who's probably on that team, definitely reach out, share your resume. They'll pass it along to the recruiter, or reach out to the recruiter directly. What I would advise against is don't reach out to everyone. We recently had a candidate who I think reached out to 6 different people at the company. And while we appreciate the enthusiasm, I don't think that they realize that every single email was then being forwarded to the same recruiter. So just be thoughtful about who you're reaching out to and how many people you're reaching out to. And if you don't hear back, then that's fine. You know, of course, move on to the next person, but don't cast too wide of a net when you're reaching out to people on LinkedIn or via email. All right, let's keep moving because I think we have a lot more messages. Let's see. Should we be posting on LinkedIn constantly? If yes, does that only have to be skills/job related?
I would say to be thoughtful about your LinkedIn posts. I don't necessarily know, if there's a formula for how many times you should or shouldn't be posting. But I think of thinking of your LinkedIn profile as an extension of your professional self. So the things that you're passionate about that you would probably, choose to share or highlight in an interview about the things you're passionate about, then posting those on LinkedIn. I would maybe caution against posting every day on LinkedIn, or else your posts, I think, start to lose a bit of the effect. But I don't think there's a right or wrong number, but just being thoughtful and knowing that those are an extension of yourself that you'd be presenting in an interview or on your resume.
I agree. There's a very fine line. There are a lot of social media platforms that have more of a kind of anything you can find on the internet purpose. I think, like Leanne said, post what you feel comfortable with. If you do want to err on the side of being more active on LinkedIn rather than regular posts, maybe you are liking or sharing and engaging with other members of LinkedIn that are in your industry and network, and just finding different ways to connect with them, even commenting on theirs. You still pop up as kind of a relevant voice on LinkedIn for people scrolling through their page. So it doesn't always have to be your original content, but you can still be very active and engaged on LinkedIn.
Agreed. Let's see. Someone had asked, can you say negotiable for salary? So you can certainly type in negotiable in the applicant tracking system. Some ATSs will not let you submit your application if there aren't numbers in that field, which is why I had said you could type in 0. But if they let you submit negotiable, then yes, of course, you can write that as well. And if it's over the phone, you're welcome to say that you're negotiable. I personally, if I talk to a recruiter as part of a job search, I typically like to give a range because I want to make sure that we're both on the same page and nobody's wasting anyone's time, because I don't ever want to get to the offer process and have no idea what a potential offer could look like. So if you feel comfortable saying negotiable to start, totally up to you, and you're welcome to do that. I would say the recruiter will probably bring it up again as part of an on-site interview or after your on-site interview. And at that point, I would say it's definitely in your best interest to have something in mind. Again, you just want to have more control, not less control, over the salary conversation. And at a certain point, you'll probably need to engage with them on a specific range.
And keep in mind too that that number can change. It doesn't lock you into anything saying it in the first conversation. Whether the number goes up as you find other opportunities or down, just keep that communication open like we mentioned with the recruiter, but don't feel like it's fully locking you into a number and you can't ever change it. But just if your number does change, inform the recruiter to make sure you're still on the same page.
Agreed. And I think this is probably the last one, and we're just about out of time too, so I'm glad we got to most of the questions. So this person said, I have a BFA but chose to complete an immersive program to transition to data science. I love to hear ways to best phrase my educational experience to not be immediately disregarded. I know everything is very competitive, but just want to do what I can to best present myself.
If I'm understanding the question correctly, and feel free to correct me if I'm not, I think something like we were talking about with that executive summary would be a great time to really explain that transition and the decisions you've made, just so that's first and foremost, and then you can elaborate on it in the interview. But something like that, just a couple sentences at the top of your resume, I think can really explain the reason you made those choices and what you're looking to do next.
Yeah, and I think as recruiters, we see there's no one right path to get to a certain job, right? I mean, that being said, there's of course, qualifications we're looking for and characteristics we're looking for to make someone a fit. But someone who has the experience and things we're looking for X position might not have had the exact same path as the next person who we're considering for the role. So just know that, and that no one has the same cookie cutter background to get where they are.
Definitely. And make sure that your kind of boot camp or immersive experience is listed in the education section, because typically it's listed from, like most recent to more previous educational experience or degrees. So if I was looking at someone's resume, I would first see that you are or you have completed an immersive program in data science, and then see that you also had completed this BFA in the past. So I don't think that I would be as confused by your first degree, knowing that you had just completed an immersive program. So definitely do that. Also connect with the program that you completed in data science. I'm sure they have a lot of employer partners that they could potentially connect you to, and could also give feedback on your resume as well, because they also want you to be successful in your new field. And I know I said that would be the last question, but we have 2 minutes, so we'll ask one more.
Rapid fire, here we go.
Getting more. I've been searching for an entry-level software engineering position, and what I keep coming across are entry-level roles that expect you to have 3+ years of experience. Why is that, and should I apply anyway?
Well, I could take this one, and just because I keep seeing so many more questions coming through, one of us will be at the booth until the end of the fair tonight, so feel free to stop by there with any follow-up questions that you have that we couldn't get to today. But I think in a situation like that, engineering is such an interesting field in the fact that there are a lot of skills that some roles will need you to have, but there is also a lot of opportunity to learn things outside of a professional environment, and balancing that out a little bit can be really beneficial. So if you are in an entry-level position or situation rather, I highly recommend utilizing things like GitHub or other tools where you can kind of show off the skills that you have so far, even if they can't be kind of read on a resume from professional experience. So that's just one tip to kind of share your skills outside of that. But I think in general, a lot of our either intern or junior positions are those positions ready for people who haven't had a chance to have professional experience. I think when you just see a software engineer position, that's not usually technically an entry-level position. So maybe kind of discuss with any recruiter that you can get in contact with about what level of experience they're looking for, and if they do have positions or an internship program or a training program that you could get involved with to get some experience under your belt before you're ready for those higher level positions.
Agreed. And I would say if you see a job that you think is entry level and it says 3 years of experience, apply. It cannot hurt to apply. And we don't follow those like very strictly. So a hiring manager might say, oh, I want 3+ years of experience. But if we find someone with 1 year who's great, we're still going to talk to them and move them forward potentially. There's an interesting statistic that's always floating around about how men are more likely to apply to jobs if they meet at least 60% of the requirements, whereas women need to meet close to 100% of the listed requirements to feel comfortable applying. So don't let that hold you back. If you see a job, you meet most of the requirements, definitely submit your resume. Like Morgan and Leanne said, don't submit your resume to every single job opening. We've also seen that. But if there is a specific job at a specific company that you're interested in and you don't meet every single requirement, give yourself the benefit of the doubt, submit your resume, and you might just get surprised.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you all so much for participating. Thanks to the incredible Buildium for answering so many great questions. And I hope that everyone who is here will get back into those booths and talk with Buildium and the other companies. And then we'll be back for another webinar in an hour. So have fun, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks,
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
See you at
everyone.
the booth.
Bye-bye.